Hey everyone, today we're going to be looking at the Ducky 1.3 Mini, a hot swappable 60% keyboard and an ANSI layout. And we're going to be reviewing it and modding it, so stick around. Man, that keyboard is very yellow. Alright, so it comes in a pretty standard keyboard packaging. And now it may look like a block of cheese, but I definitely do not recommend eating it. The keyboard weighs about 593 grams, which is a decent size heft. And that's pretty good all things considered because the case is plastic. In the box it comes with some nice spare keycaps, a keycap puller, which I could not open for my life. Come on, just... Alright, there we go, got it. A little flimsy, but not too bad. It also comes with a switch puller, which I'm not too big of a fan of, but it's nice to include it, I guess. And it also came with a nice braided yellow Type-C cable. And lastly, we get some stickers and some novelties. Except it had a blue switch in it, which it's really loud. Not a fan. I like yellow, so this keyboard has a really nice aesthetic. But if you're not a huge fan of yellow, there is another color scheme called Daybreak. The keycaps are double shot PVT with a frosted surface, which is added grip. The case also has a really nice bezel going all the way around, which is for some added stability. On the bottom, there are two sets of risers, so you can adjust the type angle for yourself. I personally don't find an issue with the regular type angle, so I don't use them. But here's what it looks like. One other feature I wanted to mention was that this keyboard comes with some acoustic treatment, and that really helps the sound profile. The USB connection is on the left-hand side of the case. For me, that's not an issue because my PC is on my left. But if you have a coiled cable, that may not be preferred. And this keyboard also has some nice gamer RGB lights. They are north-facing, so be careful about Cherry MX keycaps and the interference, should you replace the keycaps. There are quite a few RGB configurations you can do, like change the color waves, the pattern, and I gotta say, they're all pretty nice. They're just bright enough, and if anything, you could turn down the brightness. Although, I do game regularly, so having a still color is much more preferred. And in particular, I like having red on. So this is what you get right out of the box for $120 or $130, depending on the switches you get. Okay, with all the basics out of the way, here's the stock typing test. So, not too bad overall, but definitely pretty scratchy, and I'd say the keycaps make it pretty pingy, but I think we can make it sound a lot better. So let's mod it. We first start with taking off all the keycaps, and I personally find this to be pretty fun. Alright, and now we're on to the last one, the space bar. Look at those nice, beautiful red Cherry MX switches. No one would ever want to replace those. Alright, to mod this keyboard, we're going to need a variety of tools, and I'll list everything in the description. Starting with the switch opener. I got a switch puller, a stem holder, a lube brush, some kind of tweezers, some nice dielectric grease, and some 205G0 for lubing our switches. we got some Durock switch films for our Durock switches, which are a linear switch, 67 grams, and they are smoky purple. For this next part, you'll need a bowl, because we'll be taking out all of our cherry MX switches. I just find that to be a little bit more helpful in keeping things organized. While I was taking out the switches, I noticed that the bezel of the case was preventing me from getting the switch puller down all the way. So in certain areas, it was harder to take them out. And just like that, we got all of our switches out. For this next part, I went ahead and tested out the stabilizers, and I just wanted to see how well lubed they were, and they really weren't. So, let's pop them out. Supposedly these are their V2 stabilizers, but I didn't really know what was different about them from the last generation. Next, I got the 4 screws holding the plate down, because it is tray mounted. And after doing those screws, it should just pop out like so. On the bottom, there's some very thin PE foam. We have an aluminum plate here screwed into the PCB with a thin layer of silicone in between. On the back of the PCB, we have some nice yellow kale hot swap sockets. To separate the PCB and the plate, we have to undo the 5 screws holding it together. And just like that, we got them all separated. Here's that nice silicone dampener in the middle, which I thought was really nice, and I hope that future pre-built keyboards continue to do the same thing. The aluminum plate seemed pretty nice, and no real blemishes on it. Alright, and here comes what I think is probably the most tedious part, which is taking apart your switches and lubing them. And seriously, this does take a very long time, so be prepared if you do it. If you don't have a lubing station like me, then I really recommend grabbing at least 4 bowls, that way you can put all the pieces in. It really helps for organization and knowing which things that you need to work on. Next, I put all the springs from the switches into a plastic bag, because we're going to be bag lubing them, which requires getting a lube, either oil-based or the 205G0, putting some in the bag and shaking it all up for about 30 seconds, and then lightly massaging the springs, that way they're evenly coated. Now we're grabbing our 205G0 lube, and we're going to be lubing our switches. I'm starting here with the bottom housing, just getting the contact points that the stem touches, going in the hole and around the world. And here we have the top housing of the switch. Again, we're just going to go ahead and get the contact points that the stem fits into. Make sure it's nice and lubed evenly. Next, I grab the stem holder and we're going to lube our stems. So we're going to lube the contact points that fit into the housing and the sides, and the piece that fits into the spring. Next, we're going to film our switches. Now, I learned a very valuable lesson. Watch a tutorial before you do this first, because I was putting on all my switch films wrong for the first 10 to 12 switches, and it definitely became apparent when I put the whole entire build back together. So I definitely recommend looking it up, just making sure you do it all right, reassembling your switch, and you will not have problems like I did. So reassembling your switches is seriously so tedious and time consuming. So the best way or best tip I can give you is try to give yourself about 5 to 8 switches at a time and do piece by piece, film them, and then snap them together. It'll save a lot of time if you kind of just make a little assembly line, and I think it's worth it. Up next is our stabilizer mods, and we're going to use the Band-Aid mod and our dielectric grease. First, we need to disassemble our stabilizers. And you'll see that they're covered in a little bit of lube, so we need to wipe that off, as well as clipping our stabilizer stems because they have 2 little extra legs, and by clipping them, there'll be a lot less rattle. Now that we got them all done, we're going to lube our stabilizer housing, cut a piece of Band-Aid very thinly, and wrap that inside our stabilizer stem. It goes in the side with 2 holes, then dip our stabilizer legs in our dielectric grease, get them nice and coated, and we're going to lube up our stabilizer stem on the contact points. So now we have the stabilizers complete, and we're going to go on to the case. And I thought replacing the case foam that was currently in it would be the best option. However, this foam I got was a little too big, and it just wouldn't quite fit. So we end up having to go back to the original foam anyways. Up next is the tape mod, which is simply applying a layer or 2 of painter's tape on the back of your PCB. I only put 1 because I thought that would be sufficient. After all that, I put the entire keyboard back together, and I'm testing out the stabilizers now. They sound pretty good overall. I had to take it apart and make some minor modifications again just to get it to sound perfect, or to my own liking at least. Now here comes the part I've been waiting for, putting all the switches back in. There's something very satisfying about putting them back in and hearing that little click. And just like that, all our switches are back in. It's time to cover them up with the keycaps. I don't quite have the hippie of magic, but here's a jump cut anyways. With it all put back together, it was finally time to test it out. And this was when I realized my mistake. Those 10 or 12 switch films I put on backwards were preventing the key from actuating all the way. But thankfully I knew which ones they were, and I was able to replace them. And it all ended up working anyways. So do me a favor, put on your switch films right the first time. And now the moment you've been waiting for. So, what'd you think? I thought it sounded pretty good. Is it closer to being THOCC, or is it more of a creamy sound? By the way, I think it made a drastic improvement with all the mods we did. However, was it worth it? Because it probably cost about as much as a entry-level custom keyboard. Alright, if you made it this far, thank you, and if you want to see more, consider liking and subscribing. And I'll see you guys next time. Thanks.